welcome to Silver Lining for Learning, episode 168. This show is co-hosted by Chris Didi of Harvard, Kurt Bunk of Indiana University, Punya Mishra of Arizona State University, and Yun Zhao of University of Kansas and the University of Melbourne. And today we're very fortunate to have Luba and Miro join us. Luba has been a great writer. I first met Luba written online. I don't think we've ever met actually face-to-face many years ago when she was interested in ideas about, the uselessness of testing. So we started a conversation a long time ago. Then she's been building a school, which is a surprise to me that has become so global. It's not really a school, but it's really a global academy for children with all kinds of needs. So Amira is a facilitator for the academies. So today we're going to chat about that, how parents and other people actually initiate and start educational institutions using modern technology and what the impact might be in the future. So let me just get started with Luba. Why don't you introduce yourself and Miro, and then we can start talking about the hub.
Sure. So my name is Luba Vangelova, and I am presently based in Virginia. I was living in Washington, D.C. until this year. I have written a lot of articles about specifically self-directed education for media outlets such as The Atlantic and the NPR PBS Mindshift website and numerous others. And I'm also a communications consultant and a parent. Do you want me to go ahead and talk about the hub or in
You want to introduce Miro a little bit?
Okay.
Sure, I can introduce myself. My name is Miro Siegel. I am a past facilitator for the hub, but I'm still coming on and helping with subbing and doing some one-off stuff with them. But I myself am an autodidact. So I was actually raised outside of a formal schooling background. If you're familiar with the phrase of unschooling, that accurately describes what I did in my upbringing. But yeah, I've been involved in education kind of informally for the greater part of my life. So, and I'm based out of Guanajuato, Mexico.
Thank you, Miro. This is great. Unschooling, So Luba, why don't you give us a brief introduction to the hub and how it developed and what does it do specifically and how it operates?
Right. So I have been homeschooling for many years, and I noticed that especially when children get past the childhood years, so after about age 8 or 9, it just became increasingly difficult for them to maintain a consistent cohort because interests start diverging. They're all kind of, doing their own thing, because that's one of the benefits of homeschooling is you can really feed into personal interests, which of course, are varied. And it just, many children just really crave that consistent cohort, the learning with a group of peers in a kind of consistent way, but they also value customization and following their interests and learning what they're most interested and passionate about, as well as life's basics that everyone has a use to learn. And so I decided, and I'd been writing about education for a number of years, and I had visited a number of places and talked to many people around the world about different models. And I decided to kind of do a mashup of some things that I'd seen and start an in-person hub. It was to be in Washington, D.C., and I saw it as a place that would offer modular learning experiences where people could go anywhere from 1 to 5 days a week. There would be micro academies that you could enroll in part-time, full-time, and also just one-off classes. And then there would be co-working area for parents and clubs and so on and so forth. And I envisioned it starting small and then growing. And then 2020 happened, and that was the year that I had started looking for spaces to start something with just some micro academy options in person. And then, everything shut down. And so I took a step back and kind of thought about what I wanted to do, and decided, just as things were evolving over the course of 2020, that spring and summer, that I was going to start off with an online platform instead. It just didn't feel like the right time to be launching something in person. There were just too many uncertainties and too many things changing. So I rethought the whole thing, did research, did some pilot summer camps that summer to see, how some things translated or not into the online format. And then we launched in September of 2020, formally launched with a part-time online micro academy that meets 2 half days a week. And it is, we started out with it being targeted to tweens, ages 9 to 12. And it is interdisciplinary and interest-based, and it's co-created by the participants and the facilitators. And we started off with a group of facilitators, a team of 2 facilitators and a group of participants. And we kind of refined it over the course of that first year. It started out as 3.5 hours. But there was an appetite to stay longer, so we extended it to 4 hours. We tweaked some things with the format, experimented with some things, and we are now in our 4th year. And we have that first cohort, it ages up with the participants. So right now that first cohort is for ages 12 to 15. And we started a new tween cohort this fall for ages 9 to 12. And some of the kids in the older cohort have actually been with us since that first year, because it's co-created and interest-led. It can actually grow with the participants and their interests and still be relevant and interesting and challenging. We do change some things as the kids get older. We've introduced more intellectual challenges and so on, more discussions as they've gotten older. And so now we have 2 cohorts. They meet at the same time, partly separately and partly together. We have found that they actually really enjoy interacting for part of the time. And they're going to do some collaborations and some joint breakout sessions and so on. And so during the Micro Academy, time is spent on short-term activities and also longer-term group projects that run several months. And the kids then give a presentation on them at the end of the term. And there are also virtual field trips and occasional guest speakers. So it's a very interdisciplinary, emergent experience.
So thank you, Luba. That's a nice summary of what you do. I know we have questions for you. I will hold my questions before. Kurt, you want to go first since you had a question? Oh, Punya, go ahead.
I can go. So first of all, thank you both for joining us. And just for our viewers, a couple of years ago, I think June of 21 is, I'm guessing, episode 64, we had Peter Gray and Bria Bloom, who also spoke about self-directed learning and unschooling and so on. So this has been sort of a mini theme through a series of episodes. I just wanted to highlight that. So I was just curious about, like, when you started this, how did you figure out, what's sort of the budget structure like? Is it completely funded by students, or parents paying, or how does it work? And in what way, I have another question about sort of how you develop the curriculum, but let's look at sort of the structure of it, how it functions, because part of public school is it's on tax dollars, private schools, people are paying a load of money for that. So how does this How did you sort of visualize that or think about that, and how has it sort of played out?
Sure. So it is funded by tuition that is paid by the families. And there's also a scholarship fund that is designed to bridge the gap for families that cannot afford the full tuition. Everyone is expected to pay something, but if their means are very minimal, then what they're expected to pay can be adjusted. I mean, obviously, there is a limit to, not everyone can get, full scholarships and so on. And we have also received grants from a large grant making organization. And there's one currently being processed by a family foundation. I'm actually in the midst of starting a 501c3 that will be used to accept additional grants that can be used for helping to fund the scholarships.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Punya, Chris, you want to go?
So one of the things that schooling does is socialize. And often schooling socializes people in a way that's not very good. I'm not saying that all socialization is good, but the concept of socialization is certainly one that makes sense to many people, that you live somewhere and there are both explicit and tacit norms that are part of that region. And part of schooling is to help you understand that and learn to navigate within that. And also, I think even schools that say they don't socialize, because, schools are shaped by the culture and the laws and so on that they're part of. And so there's a tacit socialization that takes place in any sustained learning environment. Mm-hmm. So how do you think about socialization in the hub? Is it kind of a global socialization? Is there an attempt to stay away from socialization? How do you think about this issue?
If I could jump in and answer this one. I think that the hub is definitely very different. My experience, my understanding of socialization in a more formal, educational setting is that you're almost expected to get your socialization within the negative space of that structure, right? So you're expected to find time, like it's not explicitly there for you to socialize, but you're supposed to socialize within the cracks, or you're expected to talk to people in between, or you're supposed to work it out, and that has its value, sure. But when it came to the hub and we started talking about this, the socialization aspect of it was so important, and we wanted to be really intentional about including that as an explicit part of what we were offering in the curriculum, in the value that we were giving these families. So disagreements, misunderstandings, all of these things, like whenever conflict comes up, this is something that is dealt with explicitly within the group. And that in of itself becomes a learning opportunity for everybody involved, right? So we definitely, as the facilitators, we would try to really make sure that all of these situations were above, or were very, very visible, I should say. It's definitely, it was really important for us, especially because, oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, I just don't follow up with that, Miro. So this is that a follow-up Chris question. So you have these people globally, and the socialists, do you deliberately do something like Sudbury School would do, or others democratic school would do? Do you get the kids to talk about rules for socializing? Do you?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. And even the rules themselves are also up for debate, right? That's something that the structure itself, like our culture, the rules, quote unquote, like these are all things that we discuss with the group. And we, as a whole, make decisions on how we want to conduct ourselves and what we want to put our attention towards. Because I'm sure we'll go into the curriculum at some point, and like the content matter, but because the content matter tends to be drawn from the interests of each of the participants, sometimes, yeah, there is definitely like a mismatch in what some of the participants want to do and what the others are more interested in, right? And so navigating that mismatch sometimes is almost more important than the actual content matter itself. And that teaches a lot of really valuable, what we would call soft skills, right? Which I don't think are really so indispensable, but yeah, so it's definitely, it's been really amazing. Go ahead.
And I'll just jump in. So I see our objectives as threefold, and that is to help with intellectual development and the development of soft skills, and to provide social connection. Social connection is not an afterthought, like Miro mentioned. It is actually one of our main objectives. And some of the kids, so there was actually, I was looking back through some of the feedback we've received, and one child actually said, I have made connections here at the hub that I have never been able to make in any other setting. And he had gone to schools, he had gone to public school, he had gone to progressive schools, and he had been homeschooled at various times. So clearly, and which is one of the things that kind of initially surprised me, actually, that you could do that and achieve that online. But we have found that you can. I mean, and that's only because we make it a very, very intentional part of the culture. And like, for instance, just this week, I spent literally an hour discussing with some facilitators how to navigate a social conundrum that had come up, where some kids wanted to do an activity, but they were, wanting to do it with particular kids because they had been doing it outside of session times. So the kids can also interact outside of session times 24/7. We have a private communications platform, actually 2 of them now. So there was this kind of thorny situation that, people of all ages come across, where it's like, okay, you want to do something with certain people because of, certain, things that you can do just together. It's one dynamic, but you don't want to make other people feel excluded. You don't want to hurt feelings and so on. And literally, I spent about an hour brainstorming with the facilitators about how to navigate this. And the decision was made to basically, they're going to put it out to the kids and have them try and problem solve this, because this is such an important skill to have, not just as a child, but as an adult. I mean, I'm sure you all know so many adults that are not very skilled at navigating social situations. And that is one of the things that really makes for someone, to have a satisfying life or not, is the quality of their relationships with themselves and with others. So we make that, it's not an afterthought. It's absolutely part. And that's one of the beautiful things about not having a set curriculum and having it be emergent, is you can stop everything and take the time and the energy to actually deal with these things as they arise, rather than, oh no, we've got to get through this and this and this, sorry, work it out, and then have it poison the well in the relationships.
So thanks, Luba. That's very interesting that you kind of answer that question, and you brought up the issue of curriculum. Punya, you had a question about curriculum. Go ahead.
Actually, before that, I would like to ask Miro, when you introduced yourself, you called yourself an autodidact. And I'm wondering whether you see that as helping you connecting with the students, and about all the other facilitators. Are they also for similar bent? Like, what kinds of people are you getting who are wanting to be facilitators in this context? So maybe Luba, you can jump in after Miro talks about his personal thing, and you can talk about, or maybe, either of you, right? I'm just curious about that. Like, because we have teachers in my teacher prep program, we sort of know why they want to become teachers. And I'm just curious, Is that a different profile here?
Yeah, I would absolutely say that it's 100% helped me better connect with the participants. Part of the reason why I applied for this role in the first place years ago was because it just seemed so natural to me, right? I don't have a formal education in education, right? But what I do have is the experience of growing up as an autodidact, right, through my adolescence. And I have picked up ways to keep myself motivated. I've learned how to learn, essentially. And that was the skill that I wanted to impart on these participants, right? So yeah, I would say it's definitely been very helpful. And it's also been very expansive too, because there were many sessions where sometimes, some of the participants would have a specific question about a topic and they would ask me, and my answer would be, hey, I'll be honest with you, I don't actually know that one. Let's figure it out together and we'll do the research. And alongside me, these participants are now learning how to source answers, how to vet and filter information, how to look for, the answers to their questions. So that definitely helped with kind of constructing this model where it's all inquiry based, right? As far as in my case, my co-facilitator, Brooklyn, actually, she's not, well, I would say she's an autodidact as well. She did not grow up with that, but she is also an unschooling mom. So we ended up meshing very well on that front.
Yeah, so we've had teams of 2 facilitators. And so in addition to curating the groups, I mean, we spend considerable time and energy interviewing and getting to know the kids. It's almost, I was thinking about it the other day, it's almost like a dinner party, hosting a dinner party where you want the guests to get along, you want to, have people there who will have a good energy and group dynamic. And same with the facilitators. There's been, kind of a yin and yang approach to putting together the facilitator teams. They're perhaps at different life stages, have different experiences, but they all, and so far, one of them comes out of a traditional teaching background in public schools, but she has unschooled her own son for several years. He is now in a public charter school by his own choice. And so she, has straddled both worlds. But the others have had a lot of facilitation experience. So it may not have been teaching, what people consider teaching experience, but facilitation, group facilitation experience, being able to hold the space and kind of navigate that, and teaching online in groups, or facilitating, I should say.
Okay, well, thank you. So let me come to the question on curriculum then. So if you are sort of learner driven at the other, so that's one sort of thing, right? But at the other side, you also have the tension of that, students need to know X and Y, so that there is like the external world determining what it is that students should know. And I'm sure there is an inherent tension built into that. So how does your curriculum sort of balance that? Or you don't see that as a tension?
No, there isn't.
So
and that's the beauty of
let's hear
it.
about that.
Sidestep that by going part-time. People can do whatever they want the rest of the time. So we have people with all sorts of different educational philosophies among our families. Some are unschooling, some are following absolutely a formal curriculum outside of the hub. So we have completely sidestepped that. I learned that from other learning co-ops and other groups that I was involved in starting and managing in Washington, DC, because inevitably, even if parents felt like they were coming together because they had the same philosophy about what was essential to learn at what ages, which of course is a whole conversation unto itself. But at some point, it became evident that even if they were using the same words, they actually either had different views in their heads or their views evolved and so on. So we found that the way to sidestep that was to make it part-time, and then people can, as a family that approached me the other week from South Africa, actually, a family with 3 teenagers that was interested in our micro academy. And as she put it, she said, the academics, they've got so many options now. I mean, I was just talking with someone who runs a very popular world schooling group on Facebook and offers world schooling courses. And she has already compiled a list of 70 online schools. And that's just schools that offer like ongoing programs. And then there's a gazillion places that offer a la carte classes. The academics are so much easier now to get in so many different ways than even just 3 years ago. I mean, the landscape has just exploded with options. But it's the soft skills, and that's one of the reasons we focus on soft skills, because they're so important and they are so hard to find in most other online programs and so on. So, and the social connection, that is usually an afterthought in most online programs also, just like in conventional schools, as Miro was saying. So parents are free to follow a formal curriculum. There are many packaged curriculums out there. There are options where, and of course, even with a packaged curriculum, if you're homeschooling, you can pick and choose what to do in what sequence, how to put things together in a very modular fashion. So it's a whole new world, really.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I would also say sometimes it's also limiting, right? Because I remember from my time with the Hub, right, and running the Micro Academy, we broached topics that were so far out and were sometimes so just odd, right? And just really interesting things that one of the participants would bring and say, hey, I was reading this Wikipedia page and I don't know, I found it really interesting. They would share it with the group. And then that would spring off into a whole different conversation, which would take us into like all of these other areas, right? And so having that freedom also definitely took us to some really deep places of learning that I always walked away from the sessions feeling really fulfilled. And like I had myself personally learned something as well.
And
so.
Maybe you could mention that one example you mentioned to me recently about, I think you started off talking about eels and then it led to talking about Greek philosophy and the size of the universe.
The size of the universe, and also brought into question the scientific method and our modern understanding of it. It just went all over the place. Eels are pretty crazy. If you don't know, I recommend looking it up. Kind of a modern mystery there, but.
So I have Kurt, I know you have a question, but this just give us, I have so many questions, but I will just ask this one. In traditional schooling, one thing we always worry about is teachers, and nobody gets the best teachers. We're always dying for more and better teachers, right? So and now, Luba, you've really engaged facilitators from all over the world. In essence, they are the traditional, we call teachers. They are adults in this. So Mira, both of you can talk a little bit about how do you connect with them? How do you manage them or coach them or work with them to understand? And how much time is that? Because this is a different kind of philosophy. So how do you even do it? And one thing I would say, how do I manage this thing? How do I know if Miro is good? And if it's not good, what I'm going to do about it, right? So
yes.
We can start with Luba and then we can move on to Miro. Then after this, we'll go to Kurt.
Yeah. So, well, first off, I mean, in the usual hiring process, I mean, you get a sense for someone during an interview, and then, you talk to people's references. So, in some ways it's absolutely, the same as any other kind of general hiring process. In terms of then working with them, I mean, so the facilitators are given a lot of autonomy in the Hub. They are given so much autonomy because I try to bring in people that I can really kind of trust to do the right thing and hit the ground running. And then, but of course, I mean, I'm still involved. I consider myself a meta facilitator. So we have regular meetings, team meetings, kind of discussing what's been going on and so on. I also regularly solicit feedback from the parents. And then the facilitators also meet with the kids, and I also hear, some of the children's perspectives directly. Some of the people know each other in real life, by the way. And so they talk and they meet up in real life. Not everyone is completely far-flung geographically. And so I have many avenues for getting feedback. And basically, I mean, if the parents are giving great feedback and saying things like, my child is adamant that she comes back to the hub next year, I mean, I feel like we're doing the right thing. But I mean, like I said, I have also regular team meetings with the facilitators. We talk about how things are going. There have occasionally, of course, been, some challenges where it's turned out not to be a good fit for someone after all, despite our, what we try to have a very careful vetting process, which is also why we have a 30-day, parting of ways clause. Like if it turns out it's just not a good fit, no further commitment, because we want people who want to be there. I mean, there's no benefit to having people there that are like, so it's just based on a lot of assessment in terms of, getting feedback.
So Miro, what's your experience working as a facilitator from so many different places?
Sure.
I'm thinking about from the administrative angle, not just with students. Hanging out with students is always fun, right? So how does it feel like?
I would say, I mean, I'm pretty young. I would say with that in mind, you could consider me kind of a digital or an online native, right? And I think that has made it a lot easier to navigate, right? Like this distance. And it's also revealed a lot of the amazing different ways that this digital space can be used and things that we can do with it that aren't necessarily possible in a physical space. So administratively and logistically, I would say it's actually been really, really amazing. It's been really without its thorns for the most part. As far as working with the participants themselves, I always would describe a large part of the job description as relationship building, right? I mean, there's so much implicit and intense focus that we place on creating a safe and a nurturing dynamic and relationship between the facilitators and the participants, between the participants themselves, and also between the facilitators. And I think that really it just takes time and patience and sometimes a lot of energy. I mean, imagine having 6 or 7, young, like adolescents or tweens in a Zoom room. And before you've really figured out how to tune it properly, it can get kind of chaotic sometimes, right? And so there's a kind of grace that you need to navigate that. It just takes time and a lot of patience and a willingness to listen, right? So we function on a non-coercive, non-hierarchical model as much as we can, right? And there's this implicit understanding within all the participants themselves as well that the experience is co-created. So they also have a sense of ownership over what we do in that room, how we spend our time, and the things that we end up getting around to, right? And if some of the participants maybe feel dissatisfied and they say, hey, we didn't navigate that the way I wanted to, we didn't get to the thing that I wanted to do, that becomes a topic for discussion. That becomes something that we open up a forum and we all go over it and we make sure we're on the same page. And that's kind of the culture that we try to create. So it's really just about being a person and treating the participants as people as well. And yeah.
And being present, I would say. But also in terms of ownership, I just want to share one anecdote. So we brought on some new facilitators over the summer, and when we were having our end of term presentation in May, and I mentioned that, we would be selecting bringing on some new facilitators over the summer for the new cohort, plus one new one for the older cohort. And one of the children who's been with us for years said, so hang on, aren't we going to get to meet them? The candidates, like they wanted, the kids wanted to be part of the selection process. And so we, I thought, oh my gosh, how did I not think of this? I mean, we had kind of been talking a lot about, the fact that, the kids helped drive this and co-create this. And I was like, I have my blind spots too. And so we invited them to be part of the second interview process. I mean, the initial one I did, but then we, solicited their feedback. They got to meet, the finalists. And so that's, I think,
That's
indicative
always
of a lot.
good. We want, we want our students interview our faculty. So that's good. Kurt, you have a question. Time just flies by because I want the second section. I want to ask you some other questions. Kurt, go ahead.
Yeah, I find this interesting conversation because I'm in the midst of reading a book by Suki Kim, Without You, There Is No Us, Undercover Among the Sons of North Korean Elites. And it's all about coercion and, the kind of this taking education and hiding it somewhere. So, you can't find it, whereas you're opening up education for people in many ways. And so, yeah, I recommend that book for anyone listening. It's just so fascinating, the juxtaposition of North Korean culture and what you're promoting. When we started this show, we had kind of in mind that during the pandemic, there'd be a lot of opening up of education. I wrote the book, in fact, The World is Open, How Web Technology is Revolutionizing Education, about 13 years ago. And you talked about 700 schools been identified, or what, 70, I don't know, what
70,
was it?
yeah.
70 schools have been identified that we're opening up education for K-12 youth in a virtual way, blended way, and many other ways. So that's fascinating. That ties in with our mission was for this particular podcast show. So thanks for coming. So I had a question, but Punya's already asked it about what is an autodidact. So that was one of my questions I was going to ask Miro, but now I'll ask both of you the same question, sort of in a different way that I was going to ask you. And that is the first thing that Luba said, is that she's written an article about self-directed learning for, I don't know, was it the Washington Post or NPR maybe. And so I'm writing too about what self-directed learning is for, past 10, 20 years. I just created a checklist of 24 items for self-directed learning. I'll put in the chat window. You can take a look at that. That's in online environments. So I wonder if, Miro, you could give us a sense of what would help other people become more self-directed, help other people be autodidacts like you. What kind of learning environments would have to be in place in schools, in just in general, to help? And then Luba, if you could help us find other resources about self-directed learning. Who do you look to when you're reading about STL? Who are your heroes, and what should we be reading? And then what STL components, features, principles are prominent for you within the environments that you're creating? So what is important in the environments that you're building or promoting, or the environments you're talking to others about in terms of SDL? So it's kind of the same question for each of you. And again, I'll put in the chat window. We've also got 15 guidelines for SDL. I'll put that article in the chat window as well. And my journey article about my journey into SDL. So
I could start if you,
Go ahead.
okay. Speaking to what kind of environment is most conducive, right, and most helpful to self-directed learning, to autodidactic learning. I would say the first thing that comes to my mind is, I think, arbitrary goals and result-seeking, like a result-seeking structure is antithetical and kind of counterproductive to the goal, which is learning, right? I think that it's a good thing to have goals, but participants and learners need to set those goals for themselves. The goals need to be something that the child or the participant cares about, something that they have a reason to care about, rather than something arbitrary, right? Like, oh, you need to hit this score, and if you do, you get a reward. If you don't, there's a punishment. I think that kind of stifles a lot of a lot of creativity in our approach to learning. And I think that removing that stress and instead replacing it with encouragement and support for the goals that kids and participants set for themselves is much healthier and much more effective too, because then you don't have to fight the learner. Every step of the process, you're just a shepherd, you're guiding them there, and they're coming along willingly, right? That's when you see the best results. So I definitely think that's probably my biggest takeaway. Yeah. And sometimes it's not always obvious what those goals are. So sometimes it's the work of a facilitator to tease out what each participant, what each kid actually is interested in and wants to do. And that's where the real active listening comes in, right? You have to get to know them on a very, very intimate and very personal level so that you know what they like and you know what they're interested in, what they care about and the way that they see the world. And you're just kind of a guide and you're guiding them along that process and talking with them and helping them put words to it and help them identify, who they are and who they want to be. And that's the role of a facilitator.
And so I will just add to that. So I also see it as, and I know Miro, you in Brooklyn were doing this as well. So I would just articulate it as not only responding to what the child is doing, but also challenging them to go further. And the children also do that with each other because it's a peer group experience. So they're also kind of giving each other feedback and challenging each other to go further and deeper, asking questions about someone's interests. It provokes them to have to synthesize their thoughts and figure out how to communicate them. And so on. And so the facilitators are also looking for opportunities to push is kind of has negative connotations, but to challenge the participants to go deeper, further, and to see connections among things that they may not see themselves. So I would just want to add that. But I've written a lot of articles about self-directed education. There's a spectrum, of course, of it. And so I've written about schools that have taken measures to add more agent or, to empower students more, all the way to unschooling. So I've written about all sorts of things. My website is www.luba.vangelova.com, which has links to some of my many articles that I've written. And so, some of the books that I've been informed by are Peter Gray's Free to Learn, and also just talking to many people in the US and overseas who have been doing this in practice in many different ways. Like one person I spoke with in Amsterdam, somewhere in the Netherlands, a few years ago, for instance, like he said, the test comes first and then the learning. That was their approach in their school, was first you come across something that you need to do and you realize you can't do it. And so then you have to learn how to do it. It's how adults learn. It's like, that's how we learn at all sorts of ages. I'm still learning every week, every month. I'm sure, all of us are. And that's how we learn is, I thought he had a very good way of putting it, that the test comes first and then the learning, rather than, just learning things at a particular time, not knowing when or if you'll need them. But anyway, I think of self-directed learning basically as consent-based learning. So it can look like anything really, as long as it's consensual. And so, and like I said, we want children in our program who want to be there. And so that it creates a very different atmosphere when children want to be there. They are not resisting learning. They are actually excited about it. The facilitators and the participants, I keep hearing this every term, the time just flies by. And I realized it's referring to that flow state that Csikszentmihalyi, I think is the pronunciation of his last name. He gave a TED talk, and I think has written a book about the flow state, and how when you're in that state, the time just flies by because you are so engaged. And I realized that's what we've gotten. And I mean, it's magic.
So, Luba,
So,
I have a question, but Pune,
No,
go ahead.
I have
Chris
a quick comment. I have a quick comment. So I love this thing about, like, you start with the test kind of a thing, which is like what it is that you want to know or succeed at. And I'm reminded of, I remember doing this workshop with faculty when I was at Michigan State many years ago. And there was this criminal justice professor, and she said, many of my students, they learn a lot during the semester, but they don't realize that they have learned because it happens so sort of almost effortlessly. But she was a great teacher. And so one of the suggestions I had for her was give your final exam the first day of class. And then give them the final exam, a different exam, but whatever the skills. And they're not going to do very well in the first day of class because they clearly don't know the stuff. But and then you can have them compare how they did the first day of class and then in the final exam as a way of acknowledging that they actually have learned something, because if it happens sort of, if you're a good teacher, I think, or a good facilitator, sometimes this thing almost feels effortless. And the student don't even realize that they have gained an array of cognitive or other kinds of skills. So I was just reminded of that.
Mm-hmm.
No question there, just a comment. So,
Chris?
So there is a long history, as you note, of parents and other people outside of formal education banding together, doing something that's student-centered, that's inquiry-oriented, that encourages, agency on the part of the students and so on. But there's a couple things I think that are unusual about the Hub. One of them is that it's online because the pandemic, created an online infrastructure where now it's not the exceptional person who would be able to come online, it's most people. And the other is that because of that, it's global. And you're meeting other students as a student who are not from your neighborhood, not from your culture, not from your country, they have some similarities in the sense that they all have parents who want to be part of this, but it's much more diverse than we've seen historically. And I wonder if you have thoughts on how the online and how the diversity might shape this in a way that makes it unique compared to what's been done in the past.
Yeah, it actually just recently kind of became apparent to me that what we're doing is a form of world schooling. The kids may not be traveling like physically, but they're traveling in a sense because people, people can talk about what their daily life is, like even is interesting to the other kids. They're getting, and yeah, Miro, you want to just
if I could, I have a memory of one morning in session where we're just talking about different things going on, and I remember I was talking about there was a religious procession passing right by my house. I live in central Mexico. It's pretty like traditional here. And so there was a religious procession passing by my house, and you could hear it. And I was like, oh, and I remember looking out the window. And then I was talking to some of the other participants, and one of the participants in Albania was telling me about, some of the things that he's seen while he was there. We had a participant who was in Thailand at that time and was talking about, some of the things that she was seeing, and we were comparing, and it was just this incredibly expansive conversation. And that was just our warm-up conversation for the day as we were all waking up and, waiting for the latecomers. So it was just like, it was amazing. And it was so effortless, right? As was mentioned before. But
yeah, and we've also had field trips where there was, for instance, an American couple who was temporarily living in France. They were living in a small historic town. Well, it may not have been that small, but And so they took the kids on a virtual field trip. It was kind of like a choose your own adventure almost, because they could help direct it in real time. It's like, oh, what's that interesting sign over there? Can you like walk over there? And the kids also had read up about, some of the history of that region beforehand. It was, I can't remember if it was where Joan of Arc was from or something. And Descartes, I think Descartes had a link to it. So they had done this reading beforehand, and then they were taken, to some historic sites, but also just the day-to-day life, how people dressed, how people, I think it was interesting, like how the police officers dressed and what kind of weapons they carried. And like, why is it different than like here in the States or, whatever. I mean, it's just, all sorts of things can spark, so many conversations and like be like threads to lead into. I mean, it's just it's a much more organic and holistic way of learning that I think helps people to see connections among things and kind of understand things at a deeper level rather than partitioning them, into subjects, which has its place certainly in some things. And participants are free to do deeper dives, outside of session times. I mean, if only one child is interested in doing a much deeper dive on something, they've got a bunch of other time in which to do it in many different ways. And then if they choose, they can come back and share what they've learned. Like one student led a breakout session on music theory. He'd been learning about, all this, what he thought were interesting things about music, and he wanted to share them with the group. So he actually himself facilitated a breakout session on music theory, and several of the other kids chose to attend it and learn. And of course, it helped him to synthesize and communicate his knowledge, and it benefited them. And so it's very organic and holistic and just very different.
And it might look really kind of meandering if you only had like a 15-minute snapshot of what it was that we were doing. And why are we talking about that topic? Or why are we looking into this thing? And it's hard to see how it fits in until you see the entire thread and all of the different places and the winds and the turns and where we go with it. So one thing leads to another.
Miro, this is quite amazing. So I was just wondering, when Chris mentioned story, but it's global. So in essence, anyone, if they're interested in, could access. But I was wondering, this is a very hypothetical. It's not even a question. I just want your reflection on this. Is this serving a different kind of elite, or does it serve everybody? Right? I'm just thinking about my village in China. Technically, there's no question that they can access this. I was thinking about how much does it cost? How much more do the parents even have to realize the schools don't serve them? I've been so many schools, so I was just wondering, are we creating a new elite group of people, or can we possibly use this model to reach more kids, to bring better education to more children in a global South or anywhere? So just wondering, I don't know if you guys have thought about this.
I definitely think it would be possible, and it would be replicable without all too much like overhead, right? In that sense, I think it is scalable and it is accessible. And I hesitate to use the word elite, because I feel like that implies I don't know, some kind of like hierarchy, right? But it is somewhat circumstantial, granted, as of this moment, right? Where in that families have to be able to, they have to be in a place to be looking for this. Maybe they have some kind of discontentment with a traditional schooling background, or it didn't work for their family, or they're looking for something else, and that's how they came across it. Because this is not really in the mainstream yet. So it will necessarily be like kind of an out group for now, right? But I hesitate to use the word elite. I don't think it necessarily is it kind of sets people up for that.
I mean, I think so. I've done a lot of research and thinking about kind of the big picture and how things fit together. One of my degrees is in systems engineering, so I like to think of things in systems. Anyway, as long as, I mean, there's, in some ways, as long as the economic system has an elite and an unelite, it's almost inescapable that everything else will too. I mean, you can't, you know, escape that reality. Education, you know, an education group by itself cannot escape what is done in the larger society, but it can, to some degree, model a different way of being and a different model of civic society. I mean, I kind of think of our hub cohorts, and with all the intentionality that we place on our culture and how people interact with each other and so on, it's a different culture and different norms and expectations and so on. And part of that is, I mean, like I said, that's why we have the scholarship fund. It's intended to be as accessible as we can make it. I mean, we can only make it just so accessible. I cannot, you know, make it accessible to someone who does not have a computer or access to a computer. I mean, I just can't. And in terms of scale, though, a lot of times scale is, I think so. I think scale is everything, basically. I'm a big kind of fan, I guess one could say, if one is a nerd like me, of Dunbar's number, and with 150. That basically the theory is that no human kind of entity with humans in it can really function well with more than 150 people. Once things move from being relational to transactional, everything changes. And so that's one reason why we actually cap our cohorts. We found the sweet spot to actually be 6 to 8 kids per cohort. Beyond that, things just, you know, they just get a different flavor. But the way you can replicate it is basically just by having many small groups and them interacting with each other. So you kind of then have the best of both worlds. You have your small group, but you also have the larger pool of other groups that you can interact with. I mean, it's kind of how human societies kind of functioned in smaller groups also. And so that's how I would envision it as scaling in a way that doesn't destroy its essential benefits.
So go ahead, Miro.
I was just going to say just a quick comment on top of that. And I think that kind of serves a double purpose, right? Which is in having a smaller group size, it affords you the opportunity to be more selective, you know, towards which participants you choose to accept in that group, right? And maybe this kid, they're great, but not for this group, right? And you don't have to, you know, bend over backwards to include, right? If it's just not a good fit. So it definitely helps with that group dynamic, being much more selective, keeping smaller groups, and then making sure that everything is well-oiled and very fluid.
And selective in that, you know, they want to be there, they play well with others, and they're willing to engage. I mean, those are our main criteria. And
so I know we are getting close to time, but I just have to give a shout out to Dunbar's number. So that's awesome, because the research on that is actually very interesting. Is that if you look at people's Rolodexes, if you look at a whole variety of number of friends you have on Facebook, it is always around sort of that number that you can sort of cognitively keep in your head. Even organizations, once they go beyond that, they can, like you said, Luba, get into this transactional mode. So thank you for that.
So we have we're running out of time, but Luba, I'm very curious. You have answered very short. Okay, before Chris introduces the next episode. Based on your research, so many people contact you. Do you think there is a movement among parents to undo schools?
to undo them, or
Undo them, just to the parents, do you feel like parents said, oh, we're so tired of schools. It's just forget about it.
I absolutely think, yeah, the Buckminster Fuller, I believe it was quote about, building something new rather than trying to necessarily change something. I absolutely, I have been shocked when I have looked at Facebook groups from different countries, how many people are now joining, new people, I mean, it's tens of thousands in the UK, tens of thousands in South Africa. I mean, it's just absolutely mushrooming.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Chris, you want to introduce next episode? Thank you both, Luba and Miro. And Chris, go ahead.
Yes, and I want to thank you both as well for a really interesting episode. Next week, Saturday, 11 a.m. Eastern, we will have 3 experts from the MENA region, Middle East, North Africa, in which many interesting educational things are happening, and in which there's also a very large challenge of youth unemployment, a challenge that's not unique to that region, but that region is doing some very valuable things to try to address the issue. So we hope to see you next week.